I'm not even sure why they're even going to hold a vote for Executive of the Year. I mean, they should just hand it to Danny Ainge now and just move on and have better things to do. I mean, what he did was nothing short of remarkable.
Little preview of what's to come from this broadcast's featured guest. Those are some kind words, huh? From Gary Wolfel, NBA insider for the Racine Journal-Times and 1250 WSSP, start of the Eastern Conference Primer Series is today, with the Milwaukee Bucks batting leadoff, still in the on-deck circle, just warming up on episode number 227 of Celtics Beat, which this week is being brought to you by FanDuel and Audible, audible.com/CelticsBeat to claim a free audiobook. Support this show. Larry H. Russell, CLNS Media, here on this Sunday, September 10th, 2017. And before we begin our tour amongst the top teams in the Eastern Conference, we continue to be provided with fresh and relevant content from that Boston Celtics oasis throughout, and actually now well past, the dog days. Former Celtic, Isaiah Thomas, this past week, pretty much all this past week, my goodness, he has broken his silence in the days leading up to the press conference on social media, the Players Tribune, and then, of course, the press conference itself this past Thursday. The little guy has spoken. He's even got a few more pot shots in yesterday afternoon on Saturday. So, well, first, credit where credit is due. You know, very rarely when professional athletes express their gratitude for the support us mere fans give them gave them in the X amount of time they spend in a particular place, in this case Boston, always in this case Boston, that it comes off as genuine. But in Isaiah's case, it did. Isaiah loved it here in Boston, loved the fans, unbelievable atmosphere, clearly fed off them. I really thought it was a big part of his game. But he reciprocated and thus, in turn, further enhanced it. I said it a bunch last year. Some of those home games, because of him, because of the anticipation that he created and eventually delivered in those fourth quarters, the avalanche effect was there. I said it on this broadcast all this past season, all winter. This is a 15-year season ticket holder member saying this. Those were the best crowds since the new building opened. Fleet Center, TD Bank North Garden, TD Bank North whatever. Championship season of 2008 included. That was all Isaiah. Now, with all that said, turning to the Players Tribune piece, where all of what we heard and assumed, especially that first fifth of it, which is all I read, it was spelled out, as we know, in that column, which was written by some guy that had Isaiah's electronic signature at the bottom. Anyways, much of it was touching. I thought it further highlighted the authenticity of Isaiah's warm feelings towards the Celtics franchise, how much he appreciated the aura of it, the city of Boston, and if we use social media as a barometer, which we always have a tendency to do, not entirely accurate, but in this case it's good enough. And I can say that it's fair to say that, once again, those feelings were returned by Celtics Nation. And it almost served as a metaphor of Isaiah's actual game, like where, you know, you have this, despite his offensive brilliance, which in these parts has been referred to as the best offensive season by an individual Celtic since the 1987-88 edition of Larry Legend, comes with that little caveat of, yeah, but his defense. Yeah, but his defense, he was statistically the worst defender by a mile at his position last year. And there was, in that piece, for me at least, there was that very same yeah, but, where Isaiah reached the height of ignorance and hubris that I personally found to be it was suffocating. It didn't take long for me to forget everything that I had read to that point, and pretty much triggered me to immediately close the window of my browser out of frustration for such ignorance. And I quote, "I think my trade can show people I want to see how my getting traded, just like that, without any warning, by the franchise that I scratched and clawed for and bled for and put my everything on the line for. That's why people need to fix their perspective. ... So when players are getting moved left and right and having their lives changed without any say-so, and it's no big deal, but then a handful of times it flips and the player has control, then it's some scandal? Just being honest. But to me, that says a lot about where we are as a league, and even as a society. And it says a lot about how far we still have to go." End quote. Let's go back to people need to fix their perspective. Isaiah, I agree. First off, creating your own universal mindset for you to apply across the whole general public and then using professional athletes as a case study for social injustice. As you said, people like you need some perspective. All those passionate debates over Kevin Durant, the Warriors, should the Celtics have traded Isaiah Thomas, and all this emotion invested by the masses in something as trivial as sports, that creates an audience for potential advertisers, creates a market and a desire for those to pay exuberant amount to buy tickets, and result is that you and your peers do quite well despite the mere inconveniences of potential relocations against your will. You just talked about it in your piece. You were coming back from South Florida for your anniversary. You were off to your hometown in Seattle. There are, as we know, an unlimited amount of injustices throughout the world, then, now, likely forever. Isaiah, you are not one of them. And for everyone else's sake, please don't waste any effort trying to solve said injustices. Thank you very much. Now, let's attend some actual basketball reasons here, for goodness sake. I want to mention 300. Any excuse I can get to mention 300, I'm doing so. This weekend was the anniversary of the Battle of Thermopylae. What's the Battle of Thermopylae? Wikipedia? Watch 300, please. Thank you. Saved Western civilization, saved freedom, saved democratic principles that are the staples of today, and because of that, fortunately, we are left with the political thought and philosophy that has been instilled into us, not just in the political theater, but in business, in sports, our own friendships and relationships. How we view everything comes down to these two questions, whether we admit it or not. I actually do. What have you done for me lately? And what are you going to do for me next? Isaiah, Mr. Thomas, we're going to answer the latter first. We know it's a lot. In the post-Bird era, he is literally in the top 5, as of now, most important Celtics. At least for my money, in no order: Wick, Garnett, Pierce, Ainge, probably Isaiah. Rounds it out. Fun debate to have, by the way. But to sum it up as briefly as possible, to argue for his sake, as I am going to do so, was acquired for a bag of donuts. Jay Crowder, about a month and a half earlier, came to a team where 1 month prior was headed for one of the worst records in the NBA again, produced tremendously on the court, created a winning culture, playoffs 3 consecutive years, elevated the organization so rapidly to where they were relevant enough again so they could sign Al Horford, sign Gordon Hayward this past summer, make a trade for Kyrie Irving, Isaiah himself, coming off a second-team All-NBA appearance. Isaiah Thomas has done a lot for us lately. Now the other question. What are you going to do for me next? I don't think anyone knows. I think that's the nicest way you can answer that question. Very cold-hearted. Very cold-hearted. But those two questions have made up the mindset at the very own ignorance of many throughout the last 2.5 millennia, most assuredly Isaiah's included, who spent the last 6 months making Brinks truck jokes. So, to quote more Western political thought from arguably the greatest thinker of them all, ends justify the means. Kyrie Irving, come on down. Back on the other side of the break with Gary Wolfel, the primer of the Milwaukee Bucks, after a word from our sponsors. Fantasy football fans, football is back, which means FanDuel is back. Fantasy football for everyday fans. New contests starting every week. No busted seasons. Sign up today. Go to FanDuel.com. Click the Join Now button and use my code CelticsBeat. That's CelticsBeat, all one word. The very own CelticsBeat Listener League is taking place in Week 1, and my Tom Brady call was a whiff, so we gear for Week 2. I won't go down that road again. Let's try another quarterback and go with Ben Roethlisberger at home against the Minnesota Vikings. So again, see everyone in the CelticsBeat FanDuel League at FanDuel.com/CelticsBeat. Over 2.5 million players have won a cash prize playing fantasy sports on FanDuel. Try FanDuel for free with no deposit required. Visit FanDuel.com to claim your free contest and play for a share of $10,000. Just sign up using promo code CelticsBeat. That's FanDuel.com, promo code CelticsBeat. Void where prohibited. Back here on Celtics Beat, and thanks to this indescribable Celtics offseason, if that's the word that I can use, usual schedules for us here and everyone have been thrown into a whirlpool. It's good for business, though. I mean, don't worry, we're doing fine, of course. Good for the team, and if there was ever a phrase that I most adhere to in all walks of life, it's for the team, right, for the collective good. But in all seriousness, Larry H. Russell back here on the show with one of our stalwart guests among CLNS programming, Mr. Gary Wolfel, NBA insider for the Racing Journal-Times out in Wisconsin. Gary, it seems like it's been a long time, so I actually very rarely ask this question of my guests. How have you been?
I have been really, really well. Knock on wood, But yeah, no, it's been a busy summer, a productive summer, an enjoyable summer. So, yeah, I'm doing well.
Busy summer, actually not for the Bucks, and I do want to get into it because I'm actually excited that we can finally get this primer series rolling here on Celtics Beat. I'm starting off with Milwaukee because Milwaukee seems to be the team du jour. Everyone is telling me to watch out for the Bucks, even though I'm telling everybody else to watch out for the Bucks. So I don't know how the Bucks are so underrated now. It's one of those types of things. But I think it's safe to say we expect Milwaukee to be good. We're going to be talking about them for quite some time coming up here on the show. But you exchanged some interesting words with me off air about the summer the Celtics had, the summer Danny Ainge had for the team. And obviously everyone has had an opinion on them, even though I just referred to the Celtics offseason as indescribable, even though everyone else has described the Celtics offseason. So before we get into the primer, Mr. Wolfel, do you care to describe the summer the Celtics had here on the airwaves?
Yeah, in a word, unbelievable. I mean, most teams would have been happy to get one of those guys that the Celtics got, but they made an absolute killing. And, you and I talked about this off the air before, but, I'm not even sure why they're even going to hold a vote for Executive of the Year. I mean, they should just hand it to Danny Ainge now and just move on and have better things to do. I mean, what he did was nothing short of remarkable. Well,
you have a vote, so we can hold you to that, and you're going to be here in some 40 days in Boston for the Celtics home opener, and I believe that's the Bucks opener themselves. Is that correct? That's the Bucks' first game in Boston? Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
I think the Bucks plan on showing up. So.
Okay. Well, they better bring you along, too. But suffice it to say, there it is, huh? You approved the job the Celtics and Danny Ainge has done. So we'll hold it to you pretty quickly since, like I said, everyone's going to be getting together here in T-minus a month. So it's very rapidly here. We're going to transition to the primer, transition to the Bucks, and we'll get into a potential Bucks-Celtics, how they match up in a moment here. But for a little bit, let's solely focus on the team that you cover out in Milwaukee. I mean, it's an interesting little dichotomy, huh? Boston was in the news a lot all summer. The Bucks were not, and you can actually make an argument that's a good thing for a change. Well, there are a few teams in the Eastern Conference that are going to be bringing some continuity to their roster. The Wizards are one. The Bucks are one. So, yeah, take it away from me, man, on the summer that Milwaukee had.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of a tumultuous summer. They didn't do a lot on the player front, but, their general manager for the past 10 years, John Hammond, bolted and took a similar job with the Orlando Magic. And then the Bucks went through an extensive search. They hired a search firm, and they had it down to 3 candidates, and then they find out that they don't like any of the 3 anyways, and they ended up hiring a guy named John Horst, who was the director of basketball operations. And it's incredible. I talked to probably about 6 to 8 guys in the days after the hiring, and not one of them knew who John Horst was. And it was just a stunning development. This guy's pretty young. I think he's 35 and has had no real heavy involvement in contract negotiations, trades, or drafts. He's been a part of them, but certainly hasn't had a major say in the decision-making process. So that was the big news, in Milwaukee. And now I guess the big news is what they do with Jabari Parker, because he's up for a contract extension. And I am currently in the midst of doing a blog, and Jabari, wanting an extension, and he wants a lot of money. The question is whether the Bucks will give it to him.
What do you actually expect from him? There are a few questions that I had, but I do want to get into Jabari Parker. He's going to come back at some point. When is he? What is his timetable for return, roughly? Because I know you would know from that knee injury. Because I know he's not starting the year right away. That's correct, right?
Correct, yeah. I mean, the general consensus is he's going to come back somewhere in February, right around the All-Star break. And I talked to Jabari about a week or so ago, and he made it very clear that if he's not 100%, he's not going to come back. And if he's not 100% at any juncture this season, he might not even play at all. he's 22 years old. This is his second major knee injury, an ACL blowout to the left knee on both occasions, and he's got to be ultra cautious. He's still a young player, and the last thing he wants to do is, come back prematurely and hurt that knee again. So, that's going to be the big story, from the Bucs standpoint.
In all honesty, though, what do you think then will happen with him?
You know what, Larry?
This season, I'll hold to see it this season.
What do I expect from him this season?
Yeah, do you think he will play? And if he does play...
Yeah, I do think he will play. And, I think he'll be fine. This guy, there's a lot of guys in professional sports that have exceptional work ethics, but this guy is just amazing. I mean, he's probably got as good a work ethic as any player I've seen in the Milwaukee organization over the years. And he's obsessed now with coming back and proving the skeptics wrong. I mean, coming back from 2 serious ACLs isn't easy, and he knows it. But, if anybody can do it, I would imagine Jabari Parker is the guy that can do it.
Many people, myself included, were talking about Milwaukee. Parker was a part of that young core that they're most known throughout the NBA for. And I thought the Bucs, I thought many others did as well, made a very interesting move, releasing Spencer Hawes week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, somewhere around there.
Right.
And I almost thought that it served as almost as a metaphor in that release was like, now I know there were some salary cap implications to it, but it was very metaphorical in that it was a message that they're really banking on the continued development of their young players, which are as good and as proven really as anyone in the Eastern Conference. Is that an accurate statement to make?
Yeah. I mean, I think they're really thinking that Thon Maker can take that next step. He was their first-round pick last year, and they brought him along slowly during the course of the season and then ramped up his minutes late in the season, and he ended up starting every playoff game. And there's some people, they won't say it publicly, but they think he's got a chance to be an exceptional player. Maybe not as good as Giannis. I mean, in all likelihood, he's not going to be as good as Giannis. But if he's remotely close to that, that would just be incredible. And if Parker comes back, you'd be talking about 3 exceptional front court players. I mean, the Bucs would have one of the best young front lines in the game. But again, Thon Maker has to improve, and Jabari has to get healthy. So we'll see.
How do I ask a question about Giannis, by the way? How do I, start a conversation with him? Second best player in the Eastern Conference. What do you expect? Blah, 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 blah. How do you talk about him?
How long will he be in Milwaukee?
Oh, really? Okay. But this is about this year. This is the primer for this year. We're staying in the present moment, people here, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The guy is unequivocally one of the best young players in the game. I mean, that goes without saying. But he was playing for the Greece national team, a couple weeks ago, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, he drops out, and the Bucs announced that he's coming back to the States, and they claim that they gave him a test on his knee, and he failed it, and that was just startling news. Although I saw late in the season a couple games where in the locker room he was hobbling, and I asked him on both occasions if he's having knee issues, and he goes, no, he was very upbeat about it, didn't think he had it. But everybody's wondering now, hey, what is the deal? Was this just a ploy on the Bucs' part to get him out of games for the Greek national team, or does he have a legitimate, knee injury? And I mean, that's the last thing the Bucs want is a superstar or potential superstar having a knee injury to go with Jabari Parker's situation. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, luckily his game is not predicated at all on his athleticism, though, right?
No, I mean, it's his length. I mean, he's got extraordinary length. And I mean, if you talk to any NBA coach, the key to keeping Giannis under control is keeping him out of the lane, because once he's in the lane, he just leaps or reaches over people and scores inside. I would say probably, this is no exaggeration, probably about 80% of his points are in the paint. And, so He is athletic, no question about it, but his length is what really separates him from so many other players.
So I guess this perfectly ties into this. You really started this interview off, Gary, being negative per usual with me, as you always are. And I was actually waiting for you to say something along the lines of, look, I do expect a lot from the Bucks this year, blah, 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 blah. But I was going to ask you, what are your biggest concerns out of Milwaukee this year? I mean, I think that now jumps out at me. That's probably unquestionably number one. He's one of the 3 or 4 best players in the Eastern Conference, and if he's having injury issues, yeah, there it is. There goes the Bucks season right there. But there's also some – I know you've never been too keen on Jason Kidd's coaching in many of our conversations. They've always seemed to have chemistry issues over the course of the last 3 years. The Bucks have always been a team where going into a season, it's, hey, watch out for the Bucks this year, and that's when they win 35 games and they flop. And then there's a year where you don't expect any from the Bucks, and then all of a sudden they get a surprising 6 seed or a 5 seed or something like that. But, I was going to ask you, really, biggest fears of the team. Greg Monroe / chemistry issues, Jason Kidd coaching. You can start by throwing some of those at us.
Wow, those are all legitimate angles. I think the Kidd situation bears watching as well. I'm not so sure that the rapport between him and his players is very good. And if the Bucks would stumble out of the blocks, I think Jason Kidd could definitely be on the hot seat. He was on the hot seat, in the middle of last season when they lost, I think it was 12, 14 games.
You were leading the charge.
And what's that?
You were leading the charge.
Yeah, I mean, when the owners call you and start discussing your fate, you're definitely on the hot seat, and that's what happened to Kidd. And remarkably, the Bucks turned it around and gave a fine account of themselves in the playoffs. So I think that's going to be, something, again, to watch. I think health is imperative. We talked about Jabari. We talked about Giannis. Maybe the most under-talked about situation is Malcolm Brogdon. And Malcolm Brogdon was the Rookie of the Year. He had a fantastic season. But people forget that Malcolm Brogdon had serious foot issues his freshman year at the University of Virginia, had surgery, and came back, and it obviously has played well. But there were, a bunch of teams, Larry, that stayed away from Malcolm Brogdon in the NBA draft because of the temperament of his foot, and they just don't know if that foot is going to hold up. One NBA general manager compared it to Bill Walton's foot injury when the great Bill Walton played.
Bill Walton was putting a lot more weight on that foot, though.
Exactly, but you know what? He wasn't making all those cuts and turns and everything else. And I was told by several people that the Bucks monitored his minutes this past year to make sure that they didn't overextend them. And I would assume that's going to be the case. But that is, again, something else to look for. So, to summarize this whole rant here, health is going to be imperative for the Bucks. They got to stay healthy.
And Chris Middleton missed a ton of time last year as well before I think he came
there
back.
I
can't remember early March or mid-March, whenever it was. I do remember him playing late in the year against the Celtics and having a little bit of an impact when the Bucks picked up a huge. We mentioned Malcolm Brogdon Malcolm Brogdon, town down the street from me, slipped the tongue. Brogdon had the game-winning shot against the Celtics and even had a big fourth quarter against them in a pretty big game that actually didn't really hurt Boston at all, but was a big win for the Bucks themselves. And I want to we got to get into how the Celtics and Bucks could potentially match up. That's as fun of a conversation you could possibly have on September 10th. But to kind of finish it off solely squarely on the Bucks, their over/under is 47.5 for win total out in Vegas. That's high. That's high for a lot of teams.
Yeah.
And I expect the Bucks to be a very they're a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference. I expect that of them. But still, in terms of holding that gun to my head, that's not a bet I would want to place. I will ask you, since you know more about the Bucks than anyone who walks this earth, in my opinion. Over/under on the Bucks, 47.5. Where are you putting your money if I'm putting a gun to your head? And let's say for argument's sake, I am.
Okay. I hope it's a water gun or something.
Yeah, I'll put it in your ear. I don't think you want that, though.
I'm definitely taking the under. And, if everything falls in line, I could see this team being a 47-win team. But, again, they're not going to have Parker, until February. So They're going to miss his scoring. People forget about this. He was their leading scorer at the All-Star break last year, not Giannis. And he was averaging 20 points a game, and he was doing it relatively easy. I mean, there were games I thought he was the second coming to Michael Jordan. He was that good. But and then they also lost Michael Beasley, who was a potent scorer off the bench, especially the first half of the season. So they got some scoring issues there. And then, of course, we talked about the health situation. So I just don't see them winning 47. And I'm going to cop out here and say that they could because they're in the Eastern Conference. They're literally, let's face it, there's probably like 6 teams in the Eastern Conference that don't have a prayer of making the playoffs. They're in a rebuild mode. So that's certainly going to help the Bucks' cause. But again, I'm really concerned about the health standpoint, and I think that's going to come back and bite them.
And I think the biggest storyline of the Eastern Conference, even though no one really wants to admit it because it kind of throws a lot of cold water on the actual excitement of the NBA season overall, is the top of the Eastern Conference is as shady and as questionable as it's been in 20 years, in my opinion. Yeah. Everyone's excited about the Celtics, but that's a brand new freaking team. I like to think that we know more about the Bucks than we do about the Celtics. The Celtics literally have a brand new team. The Bucks are at least returning a team that was in the playoffs last year, gave a good series to Toronto, and there's actually some continuity there from them over the last 2-3 years. Even though they don't have much playoff success, you see a lot of times over time when teams are together, young teams, young talent, they eventually start piecing it together. That's why I'm actually fairly bullish on Washington. I wanted to make some arguments for the Bucks as actually being, I wanted for the sake of the show to make, like an argument for Milwaukee's sake that they could, are a bigger threat to win the East in that regard. But do you want to do that for me then?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought. I know you're right.
Having said that, Larry, there is still time before the season starts, and there's still plenty of rumors going around that the Bucks are trying to trade Greg Monroe. Now, let me throw this out at you. The Lakers are trying to clear up salary cap space, okay? Because of the free agents that they want to bring in next summer. And they might be able to give up one of their young pieces, maybe, Julius Randle, okay? What if the Bucks traded Monroe for Randle and another piece, another young player? Then all of a sudden I think you got to keep your eye on the Bucks,
I think that's the case already, to be honest with you. I really do.
Yeah.
Pending Giannis' health, and because, of course, I'm operating under the assumption that he's pretty much the second best player in the Eastern Conference right now. Ooh, silence. Behind who? LeBron, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one only. But, yeah, no, I totally agree with you, and that's why the Vegas odds makers gave him 47 wins, because I think last year they had him at 43, if I'm not mistaken, 44. And,
you thought that was very high. I specifically remember us having that conversation. I was like, you thought that was very high. And I actually threw that at you. I was like, that was coming off a year, 14-15, where they were expected to be good. They signed Greg Monroe, and they just stunk up the joint. And then I was like, you know what? Every time the Bucks is notorious of that franchise. Every time they have a year like that, they come right back, and they get a 6 seed. And I was like, watch out for the Bucks at 43.5, 44 around. Now, yes, everyone is bullish on the Bucks, and this is generally the cyclical trend that they've done. Not to insult over the last 40 years or so, but let's sort of finish on this. Celtics Bucks. It's September 10th. They're playing in the playoffs. I don't want to say the date, so let's call it a few days from now. They're playing in the playoffs a few days from now. Tell me what happens.
Yes. I think it's a competitive series. After all the bashing I did.
I know. No, that's what I said. You're just naturally a negative guy, even though I think we're talking about a very good basketball team here.
Yeah, and you know what? They're hungry. They have chemistry. That's the biggest concern I have for the Celtics, and you touched upon it, is the chemistry. I thought they had extraordinary chemistry last year, with Avery Bradley and Jay Crowder leading the way. I thought those two guys were just fabulous teammates, and they laid it on the line. And, there isn't any question the Celtics got an abundance of talent, but whether it's going to gel, I think, remains to be seen.
And they'd have the best player. But, yes, I too I will take Boston at the present moment, and I'd certainly like to think come May, if and when these teams do meet, which is very likely they do. Bucks Celtics, though very rare, what was once a staple during the NBA playoffs, meeting in the finals back in '74, first of the two titles during the Cowens years. Then, of course, the '80s, I think, just off the top of my head, the infamous sweep in '83, which is still referenced to this day by resident Celtics hater Michael Felger. Then Boston almost returning the favor in '84 before definitely doing so in '86. Great series in '87. Listeners, correct me if I am wrong, but believe that 7-gamer in '87 was the last time these two franchises met in the playoffs after having one of the league's most underrated rivalries for many years, if you will. Seems like I've watched enough Bucks-Celtics games in my life. I went to a ton of Bucks games in the days of the Newt Fleet Center to catch Vin Baker, the big local product, back when he was first coming out from Connecticut, and Big Dog Robinson, all at the same time. Because of that, I had to subject myself to Todd Day and Antoine Walker gunning up shots like there was no tomorrow. But a playoff series long overdue between these two teams, and I'd like to think, with all the question marks these teams have, Milwaukee's curse of injuries, Milwaukee's curse of questionable coaching, Milwaukee's curse of never-ending or seeming to fulfill potential and put forth back-to-back good seasons and live up to expectations. Any type of curse for Milwaukee. While the Celtics, with now all the frontline talent, they have no clue what they have from them as of right now. So it's very exciting, riveting, if you will. Do have to applaud Mr. Wolfel's suggestion. Oh, by the way, thank you again. Gary Wolfel never gave this man his appropriate sign-out. Gary Wolfel, everyone! NBA insider for the Racing Journal-Times, www.wolfelpressbox.com, and follow him on Twitter at his namesake, at Gary Wolfel. You know, 4 summers ago, man, now maybe longer, one of our dear listeners reached out to me, believe it was Mr. Javel, and he was monitoring the NBA wire and beat during another summer of white-hot Celtics rumors, and I was referred to the work of Gary's by this listener, and it was highly suggested to put Gary on this programming, particularly when he was all over the potential whereabouts of a one-time target of this organization and a many-time favorite of this host, one Greg Monroe, was told by our listener, get this man on the show, that being Gary. And Gary has been a big supporter to us ever since, a fine purveyor of information on these airwaves. But back to Mr. Wolfel's incredible suggestion about Mr. Monroe. We just heard Gary suggest / report the Bucks' desire to move Monroe, which has been the word really ever since he signed there. Was it like 3 summers ago now? Use his expiring contract as a means to upgrade the talent currently on the roster. Could and likely would make the Bucks better, one would like to think. But in terms of a Celtics matchup, of course, we think of LeBron, we think of Giannis, we think of John Wall. Heck, I mean, we think of Porzingis. Opponents off the top of our heads who are most concerned, just based on their talent, skill, and place in the individual hierarchy in the NBA alone. But man, for the last 3 to 5 years, it's just one of those things, with the Celts never really being able to check his post offense, and even on the boards as well. Greg Monroe, as we know, has had some big games, both in wins and losses against the Celtics. He has just been a matchup nightmare. So we're going to finish on that very high note. Greg Monroe owns the Celtics. Hopefully the Bucks trade him. Phenomenal way to end episode number 227 of Celtics Beat. Better than Giannis Antetokounmpo trade ideas, huh? The first of our primer series, where every year we look at Boston's key rivals across the top of the Eastern Conference. Little preview for next week. Going to look at the Washington Wizards. Now, this is the team I think has as good of a chance as any at being the number 1 seed in the East heading into the 2018 playoffs. Why? Perfect cliffhanger. Find out next week on episode number 228. But for episode number 227, music was provided by Chuck Dietz and Steph Legrateau. Today's sponsors were FanDuel and Audible. FanDuel.com/CelticsBeat to enter the Celtics Beat FanDuel Weekly Fantasy Football League, and Audible.com/CelticsBeat to claim a free audiobook alongside a free 30-day trial period. Please do both. Tremendous support to this production by utilizing said Celtics Beat coupon codes. I'd like to thank Gary Wolfel of the Racing Journal-Times for joining us once again. For graphic designer Scott Dillon, the founder of the network, Nick Gelso. This is Larry H. Russell, the executive producer and host. Signing off for Celtics Beat, powered by CLNS Media.